I always have admired Ridley's work, even before he did did movies. Used to do commercials, so his name, the reputation, preceded him. And I knocked on his door a few times, trying to get him to do a movie for my company, for myself. And one day he came up. He had two ideas. One was, I think it was a musical about some spaceship was crashing in Jerusalem. And the other one was Legend.
The idea came because I was following, this would be my fourth movie. And I'd done, Duelist, Alien, Blade Runner. And they were pretty exotic choices, in fact, so I'd never actually done a modern movie. And so here I wanted to get it off my chest before I then would address, let's say, a modern movie with normal modern people. I wanted to get off my chest this notion of a fairy story.
He came up to me and he said, pleased to meet you. I loved you. He complimented me on a book I'd written. Then he said, how'd you like to write a fairy tale? And I said, well, I would love to write a fairy tale because in actual fact, I'd been writing little short fairy tales and slipping them away in a drawer because I'd been doing so much film work and hadn't been writing fiction. I wanted to write some fiction. And I just was writing these fairy tales knowing they'd never get published anywhere. They were not commercial. They were just for fun.
He said, so what do you think your target within this context of Beauty and the Beast, or innocence and evil, is? And I said, well, maybe it's an adventure as well, because it ought to be, all films in some shape or form should be adventures. And that usually means the good guys against the bad guys, this is bringing down the fundamentals. I said, but maybe he's set a task to go after the fastest steed alive.
He basically said, well, here's what I want. I want to do a classic fairy tale, and I want to have unicorns in it. Fastest steed on Earth. Fastest steed on Earth. And I want the villain to be called Darkness. And that was it. That was all he wanted. So then we started mulling around, and for my ambition was that once I had this shot, I thought, oh gosh, make a film with Ridley Scott, and it's a fairy tale. Well, I wanted to do something, that was going to be like classic, that would have that resonance of, the glass slipper, pumpkins that turn into coaches, and this Puss in Boots. And so I started fooling around in my mind about what, those sorts of things might be. And so first the Jack character, I said, well, what if there was a miller, some commoner that was in love with a princess? That always sounds like a good start, And so we're sort of feeling this all out. And I just sort of ad-libbed. This was after several mornings of not getting anywhere. And I just ad-libbed this moment where I said, and what if, this princess that he's seeing on the sly back of the mill, he's a commoner, and what if she's teasing him and she takes off her ring and says, I'm a princess and I can set this challenge, and whoever finds this ring, I'll marry them. And she throws it away and it falls into this pond, and he dives in after it. And at that moment, the forces of darkness, he comes up and he doesn't know it. And Ridley's going, that's it, that's great. And he said, go do it.
He went away and came back with a first draft, which generally I thought was magnificent.
When I turned it into Ridley, he actually called back and he said, that's it, it's a hole-in-one. And I was so naive, I thought that meant he was just going to go shoot that script. But what he really probably meant was, well, I can take this script to the studio and they'll approve it, and I can take this script to the completion bond people and they'll put up the money. And now we'll start rewriting it. Because as he later told me, he said, don't you know, Guts, if we made that film, it would have cost $400 bloody million, that film. All those armies of fairies. And but I just, that's the first draft is the one time that the thing really belongs to the screenwriter, because you can more or less go in any direction you want and then hope they like where you've gone. And so basically he liked where I'd gone, but it was just, the honing came thereafter.
I loved it. It was like a green light on first script. It was beautiful.
One of the things that I think is extraordinary about Legend is that it's much closer to Grimm's fairy tales, to the kind of primal psychological things that disturb children, which fairy tales were actually invented to address. Because it's not, jolly fairy. It's, there's some really gritty, dark, bad stuff in there. The same way that there is in life. And the fairy tales were invented to prepare children for for the horrors that they might encounter.
The original screenplay, which was written in poetry, was it was so beautiful. Actually, you know, never before nor since have I ever read anything that had that kind of impact on me. It was just such a, you know, looking back on that sense of wonder, because I was so young. I really still had all of that. You know, I mean, I hate to say it, but I think it's true. You go through life and that wears, and you have to work to retain that sense of wonder. But the screenplay as it was, and my 15-year-old being they were very, very, very compatible.
The original script that I read was incredibly romantic. It was high romance. It had so many elements, and I thought, this is going to take forever to make, you know. I mean, for instance, it had scenes describing how when the unicorn's feet touched the ground, as the feet left the ground, there was a ring of posies that sprung up. So as it walked, and there were flowers. We never managed it, but I never even attempted it. But that sort of thing, and I thought, this is really going to be magic.
Well, the Hawksburg screenplay I thought was absolutely incredible. But I thought, I don't know how they're going to film it, because it would be costing a fortune. And it was worked on, obviously, Ridley and him have worked on this for a long time. We had this room with storyboards, which Ridley is a past master at storyboards. So you'd wander this room, looking at the script as well as reading it, and you're thinking, well, that's $1 million, that's another $1 million, and that's the reason certain things were scaled down, because it was just too good to be filmed, you know.
All kidding aside, this script is amazing, right? I mean, it's basically, you know, on par with like Lord of the Rings, in essence, and it has that much texture and detail and whatnot. So as I'm reading this screenplay, I'm thinking to myself, this is amazing, and finally, you know, it's like one of these reads where you start going, I'm forgetting I'm reading a script. I'm now in this world. I'm completely consumed by these ideas and the notions in the story, and it was quite a grand fairy tale indeed, with a cast of billions, you know. And so I get lost in it, and then I close it when I'm done reading it, and I just go, my dear God, that was the most amazing story, gripping, you know, completely great characters all the way through. I think I better read that again. It seems as though there's a million things in this screenplay. So I go back and I read it again, and I start marking it, right, for, okay, now I've got to make all this stuff. So I start marking it and sort of cataloging it and all this kind of stuff. And basically when I'm done, you know, I was right with my first instinct that there was actually so much in the film that it was going to be a very interesting conversation with Mr. Scott after I had gotten done with my read.
One of the producers, or maybe just it was a studio executive, was Marcia Nassiter. I don't know if you know of her. She was one of the first, I think she was the first female executive in all of Hollywood. And she was this tough old gal, you know, probably in her late 60s, chain smoking away. And we were in her office maybe at Fox talking about the script, and she said, well, there's only one thing I have to say about this script. And I said, yes. She said, you can't have the villain fuck the princess. So you can see how my first draft was kind of like far afield from what, you know, although it was all really there, the unicorn, the freezing over, the ring in the pond, you know, it was virtually all there in terms of the great story movements, but, you know, in the details, a lot changed.
I have no time for this. I'm going.
Spriggan and Banshee, my girl. These woods be thick with them. Steer clear of toadstool rings and willow trees and old oaks.
Well, the themes of good and evil are very innate within the nature of the story, and therefore
I'd have to put a scaffolding rig in there, which would be the size of the football field.
So we had this big, like, vast spray gun that just sprayed this stuff.
I was completely gobsmacked to see that set for the first time. And nothing that I've ever done since then has ever impacted me. I mean, it was the first film I did, so maybe it would have anyway, but just to have it the scale, the actual grand scale of everything was sort of absurd. I mean, I know that there are films done on that scale now, but it was just awesome, unbelievable. Like an entire forest in a soundstage, complete with the sounds of a forest, because they had, you know, about 300,000 birds in there all the time. You know, every single word of Legend was dubbed. Every breath, every single word was dubbed, because the sound was just ridiculous in that place, and just the big machines blowing chicken feathers at you. And I probably still have chicken feathers in my body that I ingested when I was 15, because it was just unbelievable, the atmospheric stuff going on. And wow, yeah, it was amazing.